I'm sorry. So how are we doing with Carey? Is she there? Oh, okay.
Here.
Hey, Carey.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you great. Thank you so much for calling in. So we've got about 15 minutes left, and I want to hear what is going on because why don't you tell everyone, this is Carey Gillam. She's the author of Whitewash. It's an incredible book. If you really want to know the truth about what's going on behind the scenes in our government with policy decisions which impact what you eat every single day, the air you're breathing, the water you're drinking, all these kinds of things. Carey has been in there researching these things and understands the how things are really happening. And we don't get the whole story, trust me. You do on Smart Health Talk, but you're not getting it from television. But Carey will give you the whole story in her book, Whitewashed. Okay, Carey, so first of all, where are you?
All right. I am on a bench in the 19th floor of the federal courthouse building in San Francisco.
Okay.
And I've been here all day. I told your producer I'm a little brain dead, probably. But what is happening here is really significant. And there have been there are press here from overseas, actually, to cover this. This is the Science Week in the litigation that's brought by cancer victims, people who have developed non-Hodgkin lymphoma or their loved ones who have died. They have filed on their behalf lawsuits against Monsanto alleging that Roundup caused them to develop this disease. Roundup herbicide, which is made with glyphosate, of course, is the active ingredient. Your listeners probably know, this is a very controversial subject, whether or not this chemical, which is the most widely used pesticide in agriculture in the world, causes cancer or not. And our International Agency for Research on Cancer declared it to be a probable human carcinogen in 2015, which led, to this flood of litigation against Monsanto. So what is happening today is really remarkable, or this week, Monday through Friday. Expert scientists have been brought in to lay out for the judge in this case, in public sworn testimony for all to see, to go through the science and essentially analyze it for the judge. And we have plaintiff's witnesses as well as defense witnesses. It's really, especially today, the Monsanto attorneys are cross-examining these epidemiology experts who are speaking on behalf of the plaintiffs, and it's getting quite testy in some of the exchanges. So it's really interesting. At the end of all of this, when it concludes, the judge will decide whether or not the scientific evidence and the experts have provided sufficient, weight for the judge to allow these cases to go forward to a jury. So that's what's going on here. And as I said, if you're somebody like me who's really concerned about pesticides, and particularly this most widely used one, and concerned about the science and what's been manipulated and hidden, this is the place to be because it's all being laid out there for public testimony.
Well, and the decision that's happening in California actually will have a ripple effect worldwide.
Well, I mean, it definitely will in terms of this court case. The attorneys all sort of have the sense that now if the judge turns this back, if he says you don't have the science on your side or you haven't convinced me that your experts, can prove this, the lawsuits probably don't have, much wind behind them. It doesn't kill them outright, but effectively it would in the long run. And on the opposite point, if he says, yes, you can go forward, your scientific evidence is sufficient, you can go forward and we'll take this to a jury, the lawyers are telling me many, many more thousands of people will be, rushing to file lawsuits. So this is a big deal this week, Science Week.
How come, Carey, that the way the burden of proof is going, that we have to prove that this is safe? It's like, we're having to prove it's safe. How come Monsanto's not? Are they having to prove it's safe at the equal level that the other side is?
Well, the plaintiffs, of course, are trying to prove it's not safe, while Monsanto is saying that it is. But, the burden of proof is really on the plaintiffs, as you said. This is something that's been used since 1974 in the United States, and Monsanto has long claimed it has science on its side. and that it has the regulatory backing, from our EPA and regulators around the world to affirm that. But what we've seen come out in this litigation is Monsanto's been forced to turn over a lot of internal documents, emails and reports, memorandum, and communications between their own scientists and regulators. And what we've seen is a very, in my opinion, significant level of deception and deceptive tactics strategically employed by Monsanto to manipulate the scientific record and to convince regulators to assess the science in ways that favors Monsanto. And these are all laid out in these internal Monsanto documents about how they discuss ghostwriting research papers and secretly enlisting the aid of academics and professors as they funnel money their direction and wanting to keep it all secret as they get these professionals to tout the safety of their products. And there's as I said, a whole array of deceptive tactics that come out in the evidence, and that doesn't bode well for Monsanto. But at this point, the focus is on the published peer-reviewed epidemiology and toxicology data that exists for glyphosate.
Well, I know that I had seen one document that showed back in 1984 that they had actually done research at the EPA on glyphosate, and I was able to track down the reviewer who had signed off on that data. The scientist had passed away, and the other person, I think they had passed away too, but I contacted her and I sent her the paper that she had signed. And in that paper, the results were that glyphosate caused a rare kidney tumor. And their conclusion was that it was carcinogenic and that it should not be approved. And she said that we had the best scientists who had ethics, we had the best equipment, that they knew how big it was, so they were extremely careful on everything that they looked at, and that she reviewed the data many times before she signed off on it, and she still stands by her position of approving that research and their conclusion today.
Yeah, I'm guessing you're talking about that mouse study, Knevich and Hogan, which was very controversial because the EPA, as you're describing, the EPA scientists at the time that it was brought to them did say this glyphosate is causing rare kidney tumors in mice, and the control group, the mice who were not exposed to glyphosate, show no rare tumors. And they said that this looked like it could cause cancer. Now, that was very early on, and Monsanto objected to that assessment and put a lot of pressure and employed a lot of strategies to convince the EPA higher-ups to overrule their own scientists, and they were successful in doing that. And that study actually is part of this scientific hearing here in San Francisco. The plaintiffs want to bring in that evidence, and Monsanto has objected and wants to keep a lot of it out of the courtroom, and so there's a little bit of a battle that we may see shape up here over that.
And what about long-term studies? There's no real long-term studies, and that was one of the things that Sarah Leaney had done. Was go underground with a group of scientists. It wasn't just him, and they did a 2-year study. But what he told me when I had got a chance to meet and talk with him once, he said the problem was that all these other studies are feeding GMO feed to the rats. So pretty much all these studies really don't have any weight because they're feeding the rats GMO feed. And that's what threw off his study compared to the other studies. And that's why they said that these rats have a tendency towards mammillary tumors, was because they had been feeding them GMO feed. As all these labs, that's what they do. They have a place where they were getting the feed, and it's all GMO. And he said that's what threw his study off. But they were ready with his results. They were ready to deregulate, to say that Roundup could not be used in Europe anymore. They were
Yeah.
ready to actually move forward with that. It was a 2-year study. It was like the first long-term study that we had. These other, well, actually, from what Dr. Sunoff told me, that we had some long-term studies. They were buried, and that Anthony Samsel, Dr. Samsel, had been able to get some documents from the EPA, but he wasn't allowed to share them for some reason, which is going against the Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah,
So
I have those same studies, and I had to sign probably the same agreement he did with EPA. It is an odd part of the
well,
Freedom of
what did they
Information Act.
say, Carrie, that, are they trying to hide so much?
Well, they give you the studies on a disc. I have them on a disc, but I did have to sign an agreement that says I won't share them or, make use of them commercially or publicly, or that sort of thing. So you can look at them and read them, but you can't share them or have anybody analyze them because they're considered trade secret. And many of them are stamped, Monsanto, confidential trade secret, and that sort of thing.
Well, did they say that Roundup is safe, or was it the opposite?
Oh, there's thousands and thousands of pages of data, and again, it's how you interpret the data. I don't know that I've ever seen any study that says, concludes with Roundup is safe.
Well, yeah, explain.
Or Roundup is not safe.
Explain that, Carrie, because you just said interprets the data, and like you said, they're presenting these different studies, but
right.
You could choose like 1,000 different ways to interpret data.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're looking at odds ratios. They're looking at different levels of statistical significance. And what a couple of the different scientists today testified, and it stuck with me, no scientific study is perfect. Scientists don't consider, a single scientific study in isolation to be definitive. They don't consider it to be the perfect science because there are always going to be sort of maybe confounding factors or errors in certain. It depends on if it's epidemiology or toxicology, but what they're focused on is they're saying you take the weight of evidence. You don't look at one study or two or three or four. You look at a lot of different studies that are done over a course of time, that are robust and that are peer-reviewed and that are published, and you put all of that together, and if you see a trend, if you see over and over and over again that, yes, this chemical seems to have an association with all these people developing non-Hodgkin lymphoma, that's meaningful. And that's what they're seeing in all of these studies.
But wait a minute, Carrie. What about the World Health Organization study where they looked at the whole product? Because what Dr. Sunoff said also is that all these chemicals, Roundup as a whole has over 100 chemicals in it, and all of those chemicals are tested in isolation. They're never tested after we mix them together and create these new chemicals. And what was different, I understood from the World Health Organization study, was they actually looked at the whole product, including those other chemicals and the interaction of those chemicals, versus just the glyphosate active ingredient.
Are you talking about IARC?
Yes, the IARC study,
yeah.
Yes.
IARC looked at, so IARC didn't do any new research, right? They only looked at existing studies that had already been done. And they did look at studies that were done on formulated products, on different Roundup formulations. But they also looked at studies that were done only on glyphosate. So they looked at both. They looked at sort of the universe of published peer-reviewed studies. But
I wondered about that.
It's true. Well, and you can read the monograph. It's up on their website, and you can read the whole thing. I can't even remember how many pages, 100 maybe. But it is true that our EPA does not require extensive long-term tests on the safety of the formulation, which is Roundup, which is what we buy and we use and we spray, and it's in our food and our water.
They're only looking at like 3 months to maybe a year, not anything like 2-3 years, and we're taking it all that time. So.
And they look at only the active ingredient. They only require these extensive long-term tests on the active ingredient, which in the case of Roundup is glyphosate. So
which is weak.
You have right, and you have the co-formulants like POEA, the surfactants, and others that, as Seralini and others have found, can be much more toxic than glyphosate by itself. So
yes.
there are lot of shortcomings.
Well, I hope they're going to be talking about that in that in that courthouse. But everyone, Carey Gillam, Whitewashed is her book. Go find her on Twitter. She's an avid tweeter. She'll keep you up to date. Follow her, please. Hey, and follow Smart Health Talk while you're at it too, and find us on YouTube and all the other social media. And go look for the book. Okay, you'll find it on Amazon, I'm sure. And go find her. Do you have a Facebook too, or a website?
I do have a Facebook page. I've been live tweeting though from the courtroom. So
okay.
That's good if you're interested in this. And
so the Twitter was a good recommendation.
Twitter is a good recommendation.
Okay.
We're also blogging on US Right to Know from the courtroom.
Oh, okay. Okay, so there's two references, everyone. And please call your representative and let them know what you think. All right? If you don't like this, you don't want poison in your food, let them know, please, because your voice matters. And thanks for tuning into Smart Health Talk. And you picked the right radio station to listen to, KCAA. And find us on iHeartRadio with our podcast, everyone. And we're going to be working on this video and getting it up on YouTube and sharing it. So you can share it with someone else, too. All right? Okay, we'll be back here Tuesday at 4 o'clock. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Elaine McFadden. Bye.
Be sure to visit our website at smarthealthtalk.com.